Have you ever wondered why certain people occupy your thoughts, appearing in your mind unbidden, sometimes years after they've exited your life? You try to forget, to move on, yet their presence lingers like a persistent shadow in your consciousness. What if I told you that this psychological phenomenon isn't random at all, but rather a profound message from the depths of your unconscious? Carl Jung, the pioneering Swiss psychiatrist who broke from Freudian tradition, would suggest that these recurring thoughts aren't just emotional residue, but powerful symbols emerging from what he called the collective unconscious, revelations about your psyche that demand attention and integration. Jung's analytical psychology offers profound insights into this mysterious experience through several key concepts. First is his theory of the shadow, the repository of repressed aspects of ourselves that we refuse to acknowledge or express. When someone remains fixed in your thoughts, Jung would argue they've likely become carriers of your shadow projection. Everything that irritates us about others, Jung famously wrote, can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Second is his concept of the anima and animus, the feminine aspect within men and masculine aspect within women, respectively. Jung observed that people often become fixated on those who embody these contrasexual archetypes, representing parts of the psyche yearning for expression and wholeness. Third is his understanding of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that aren't causally connected, but reveal deeper patterns of psychological significance. The persistent appearance of someone in your thoughts might represent what Jung called a constellation of the unconscious, an activation of archetypal material seeking conscious integration. Jung recognized that the human psyche evolved as a complex system of archetypes, universal patterns and images that form the collective unconscious shared by all humanity. This evolutionary heritage makes us particularly receptive to forming powerful psychological attachments that transcend rational understanding. Jung's concept of psychic energy, or libido, explains how emotional investments continue to influence our thoughts long after physical separation. Unlike Freud, who viewed libido as primarily sexual, Jung saw it as a more generalized psychological energy that could become fixated or blocked. When someone occupies your thoughts persistently, Jung would suggest they've become a complex, a cluster of emotionally charged associations centered around an archetypal core. These complexes function autonomously within the psyche, erupting into consciousness when triggered, which explains why certain people seem to occupy our minds against our conscious will. In our modern context, Jung's insights on the persistent presence of others in our thoughts become even more significant. Jung warned about what he called psychic inflation, the dangerous identification with collective forces that diminishes individual consciousness. Today's social media landscape, with its emphasis on presentation and comparison, creates perfect conditions for projection and inflation as described by Jung. The people who occupy your thoughts may represent what Jung called the unlived life, potential aspects of yourself that remain unexpressed in a culture that rewards conformity and superficial connection. Jung would likely view our digital relationships as breeding grounds for what he termed participation mystique, a primitive psychological state where boundaries between self and other become blurred, making it difficult to distinguish which thoughts and emotions truly belong to us versus what we've unconsciously absorbed from others. Throughout history, Jung identified this pattern of persistent preoccupation in the lives of numerous influential figures, seeing it as evidence of the archetypal forces he described. Jung himself experienced this phenomenon in his complex relationship with Sigmund Freud, which Jung later recognized as a projection of his own father complex and the need to establish his intellectual independence. Jung analyzed how Nietzsche's writings revealed a powerful anima projection that eventually overtook his consciousness in what Jung termed psychic possession. Jung's examination of medieval alchemists showed how their persistent preoccupation with transforming base metals into gold reflected an unconscious projection of the individuation process, the psychological journey toward wholeness that Jung considered life's central task. These historical examples validated Jung's conviction that our most persistent thoughts about others are actually messages from the unconscious about our own psychological development. Jung offered a transcendent perspective on this psychological phenomenon through his concept of individuation, the lifelong process of psychological integration leading toward wholeness. When someone persistently appears in your consciousness, Jung would encourage approaching this as what he called active imagination, a method he developed for engaging directly with unconscious content. Rather than dismissing these thoughts as mere obsession, Jung would suggest asking, what archetypes might this person be carrying for me? What elements of my shadow am I projecting onto them? What aspects of my anima or animus do they embody? Jung emphasized that psychological freedom comes not from escaping these persistent thoughts, but through conscious relationship with them. There is no coming to consciousness without pain, Jung wrote, suggesting that the discomfort of these recurring thoughts actually signals an opportunity for profound transformation and the emergence of what he called the self, the archetype of wholeness and the true center of personality. Perhaps the most fascinating manifestation of this phenomenon appears in our dreams, where these persistent figures often take center stage in elaborate psychological dramas. Jung devoted considerable attention to dream analysis, viewing dreams as direct communications from the unconscious that compensate for conscious attitudes. When someone repeatedly appears in your dreams, Jung would interpret this as evidence of an active complex requiring integration. The emotional intensity of these dream encounters, whether characterized by longing, fear, anger, or reconciliation, provides valuable clues about the unconscious material being processed. Jung's approach to dream interpretation differed radically from Freud's, focusing less on repressed desires and more on the prospective function of dreams as guides toward psychological wholeness. Dreams featuring persistent figures often contain symbolic elements that Jung called mandala symbols, representations of order, integration, and the self-archetype emerging from psychic fragmentation. The emotional quality of your persistent thoughts about someone carries significant meaning in Jungian analysis. Jung distinguished between what he termed feeling, a rational function of evaluation, and affect, the emotional reaction that occurs when a complex is activated. If your thoughts about someone carry a strong affective charge, Jung would see this as confirmation that they've become entangled with autonomous complexes in your psyche. These emotional reactions often follow what Jung identified as typical motifs that appear across cultures in mythology, fairy tales, and religious symbols. Whether your persistent thoughts manifest as romantic longing, betrayal, abandonment, or idealization, Jung would trace these patterns to archetypal sources in the collective unconscious. The healing path involves what Jung called feeling into these emotions, consciously experiencing them without being overwhelmed. As part of the alchemical process of psychological transformation he termed the conjunctio oppositorum, or union of opposites. Jung's later work increasingly emphasized what he called the suprapersonal or collective dimension of the psyche, suggesting that our most powerful attachments may serve purposes beyond individual psychology. He observed how certain relationships activate what he termed archetypal transference, connections that carry the projections not just of personal complexes, but of collective patterns that transcend individual experience. In his examination of synchronistic phenomena, Jung noted how people who remain fixed in our thoughts often coincide with meaningful external events, as if orchestrated by what he tentatively described as a causal connecting principle operating outside conventional understanding of time and space. This perspective offers a profound reframing of persistent preoccupation with others, seeing it not merely as psychological unfinished business, but as participation in what Jung called the mysterium conjunctionis, the mystery of connection that forms the basis of human psychological and spiritual development across cultures and throughout history. The truth about why someone remains fixed in your mind transcends conventional explanations, revealing what Jung called the transcendent function, the psyche's inherent drive toward greater consciousness and integration. These persistent thoughts represent what Jung described as the tension of opposites, the necessary psychological conflict that precedes breakthrough and transformation. Next time you find yourself thinking of someone you can't seem to forget, remember Jung's profound insight that in all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order. The person occupying your thoughts may be the key to unlocking what Jung called the treasure hard to attain, the realization of your authentic self through the integration of conscious and unconscious elements. What unconscious message might they be delivering? What part of yourself seeks recognition through their persistent appearance in your mind? As Jung would ask, what does your soul want you to know?